Let me first recognize our veterans that we do have with us tonight. I see John Lucky Luckadoo. John, hello. Thank you for being here. Yeah, we need to unmute you. Wait just a second.
Thank you, Glenn. Glad to be aboard.
Okay, thanks very much, Lucky. We've got a couple of fellow veterans tonight. We're focusing on Ed Catrell. Ed, please say hello.
Hi, everybody. Glad to be here.
Ed's been with us most of these Thursday nights for the past couple of months, so we feel very, very lucky to have had him and his comments. And tonight we're going to focus on the 9th Air Force and Ed's story as a P-47 pilot with the 9th Air Force. And then besides that, we have Joe Peterburs. Joe, please say hello to the audience.
Sorry I missed it last week.
Joe, no problem, Joe. Occasionally, there must be something else more interesting than us, although it's hard to imagine. Thank you, Joe. And next week, we will be featuring Joe's story with David and Margaret White, who wrote a book on the P-51 and the development of the P-51. I see Robert Matson. Hello, Robert. Thank you for joining us. Great. Right here from the Pittsburgh area, no less. And I don't quite, I see Colin. Hello, Colin. Thank you. These are a lot of our friends who have been joining us over the past few weeks and contributing mightily to the story. And we deeply appreciate all of you being so interested and being supporters of the BBC. So let's get into the evening. First, just a real brief review of last week's episode, one that dropped last Friday. So tomorrow will be the next one. I don't really have a whole lot to say. I'll make a couple of comments, and if anybody else wants to comment, please do. I think they continue to get better, at least as a dramatic series, right? And of course, they still keep telling the story of the 100th Bomb Group and the 8th Air Force at large, but specifically the 100th Bomb Group. And last week, this past episode focused now on the main character. It looks like it's becoming Rosie Rosenthal, who Lucky knew. And this Rosie's story is an absolutely fascinating one in the book, Masters of the Air. And I really like the actor that's portraying him. Can't remember his name right now, something Man, as I recall. And I think he's doing a fine job. This past episode is when Rosie makes his 25 missions and he could go home. And instead of going home, he re-ups for another set of missions. And they've upped the number of missions from 25 to 30. And then eventually they go to 35. So, Rosie becomes that real leader of the 100th Bomb Group. He's not the commander, but in spirit, I guess, he's the leader. Then the other part of the program, of course, focuses on the POW camps. And you begin to get more of the story of those thousands and thousands of men who were shot down and captured and in the POW camps. We had last week Marilyn Walton on with Anita Sybesma. Anita, if you're on and I got that name right this time, you'll be proud of me. Marilyn was one of the consultants to the Masters of the Air show, and Colin as well was with us last week. So we had a great show about POWs. We're going to have Marilyn back in a few weeks in April to go deeper into the POW story. So that's all I really have to say on the episode. Anybody else want to volunteer? Any comment on the episode before we dig into our story here, or our guests?
Yeah, you can feel free to raise your hand, your Zoom hand, or wave your hand in front of the camera if you'd rather. If you have an observation about the last couple of episodes, we'd be happy to hear them. Speak now or forever hold your peace. There we go, Colin.
Tony, I'd just like to comment that Rosie never had a mustache. They have taken liberties throughout the series in plastering mustaches a number of members of the Bloody Hundred that never, ever had uh, any mustaches or any facial hair. So those are liberties that directors can take. But I just make that comment in passing.
Thank you. Well, our own Todd DiPastino had a mustache a couple of sessions ago for about 15 minutes.
That's right. Hey, Colin, you had an observation also, Colin.
Yeah, I defer to Lucky and to Ed Cottrell and Joe Peterburs. They're the living national treasures that we have. But I think that it did a good job, in my opinion, of delving into the psychological impacts of what the guys were dealing with. Not just the missions, but the aftermath of guilt complex of fear of the next possible mission. And I defer to these three gentlemen that I just mentioned, but I think they did a pretty decent job of bringing that out.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I agree too.
I think they've done a wonderful job, and a lot of it seems to come out through Rosie Rosenthal's character, and the actor that plays him, I think, does a masterful job of it. Robert Mattson.
I just have a quick question, maybe of Colin. A couple of nits that I had to pick is, were the B-17s bait to draw up the Luftwaffe? That seemed to be kind of a Hollywood twist on it, but I'm not sure.
No, the B-17s, I mean, Lucky may know better than I, but I'm not aware of using bombers as bait. I'm aware of using the fighters as a forward reconnaissance unit, like Hub Zimke started doing right before Jimmy Doolittle said, okay, this is doctrine. Send a fighter screen out ahead to get the Luftwaffe up, or shoot them up on the ground and try to minimize as many coming in on the bombers as possible, and then let the escort fighters trailing behind engage what's left over. But I'm not aware of using bombers as bait. Maybe someone knows something I don't.
Lucky, you have any, or Tom Hughes, you have a thought on?
Well, yes, they definitely did use the bombers as bait to draw the Luftwaffe up at certain stages during the time that I was there. And of course, that was early 40 or mid 43 to early 44. And there is no question that the strategy varied between whether or not they used fighters or bombers to lure the Luftwaffe into combat. You didn't really have to encourage them very much because they were protecting their homeland and their backs were to the wall. So they were getting up into the air against us as frequently as they possibly could, whether we were fighters or bombers.
Good to know.
I see someone else with their hand up. Is that Joe McCarthy? We need to unmute you, Joe.
Oh. Hold on. I was just playing with my mustache here. Hold on. Oh, okay. Hey, Joe.
You look a lot like Rosenthal.
That's right. That's what I'm going for.
Can you hear me
There
okay?
you are. Yeah, I got it.
Okay, I have a mustache for real, so I don't have to put one on. So, good evening, Todd and Glenn and Lucky and Ed and Joe. Thank you all for outstanding work to bring all this to life. I had a question. Well, first of all, observation. I think it's the episode, the last one, where Rosie's finished his 25th mission and is coming home, and they're shooting off flares, and the crew is carrying him away. I can't remember the last time I laughed and cried at the same time. I mean, that was really a unique moment for me, at least, watching Masters of the Air. So my question for Lucky and for Ed when he's talking is, what was it like for your 25th mission, Lucky? Do you remember that? And was there a lot of fanfare like they did for Rosie?
I'll never forget it. Of course, I remembered it, Joe, vividly. And it was one of the happiest days of my life to realize that I had literally survived a combat tour with the Bloody Hundredth in particular, because at that stage it was such a rare occasion, an occurrence that you just, and in fact, I think they have a picture of me when I got out of the airplane. I kissed the ground and thank God that I was still alive and had survived. That was not unusual for people who did complete their tour, and certainly in the Bloody Hundredth Bomb Group, it was such a rare occasion. I think of the 4 or the 40 classmates of mine who went to the group as co-pilots in the original group, only 4 actually completed the tour. And of course, those were stretched out over probably a 2-year period, not bunched together at all. The crew I went over with did finish the first tour in the 100th, and that was a very fast tour. That was Glenn Dye's crew, and all of us but 2 of that original crew finished together. So that was rare too. You get the impression, I think, from the Memphis Belle movies that crews stayed together and flew together for their entire tour. And that was very rare. That was very unusual. That didn't happen in practicality very often.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you. Well, how about one more, and then we need to get into our presentation.
Yeah, there's one person I want to introduce, Eric Montgomery, who's done so much for so many World War II veterans over the years. And among the services that he's done is shepherded the process, the complicated process of getting a Legion of Honor, a French Legion of Honor, for those who participated in the liberation of France. And Eric, I think you want to ask John Luckadoo and Ed and Joe if they have the Legion of Honor. Eric, you're with us?
Yes, thank you so much, Todd. I hope you can hear me okay. I've been helping men apply for and submit their evidence to the French government for the French Legion of Honor, which is their highest accolade that they can bestow upon a person that's done great deeds for France. And certainly all our boys that did that in World War II across France itself are eligible for that. So I would be more than happy to help each and every one of you that are World War II veterans on the call tonight to apply if you not already have it. But if you do have it, congratulations. But if you would just chime in, and I will be able to work with Todd to get a hold of you personally.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Eric. And thanks for the work that you do.
Welcome. Thank you.
And then I think I saw Tom Patton with his hand up, and certainly want to recognize Tom. He was very helpful introducing us to our featured guest tonight, Tom Hughes. So Don, thank you. And you had a question, Don?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
My comment was, and this is an Army guy speaking, but the mustache in the Army, you weren't allowed to wear facial hair because of the securing of the protective mask, and I have a feeling that was the same. Since they were having to wear oxygen and mask, the facial hair would prevent good seating of the mask on the face. Lucky can answer that question.
Yes, that is true. We weren't prohibited from doing so because John Egan actually had a mustache and he kept it throughout. And a very few did, but mostly as a practical matter, it interfered with the oxygen mask and therefore was not a desirable thing to do. Plus the fact that most of us were so darn young, we couldn't grow a mustache.
And then there's that. Yes.
We just had facial fuzz.
Okay. Well, thank you, Don, again for introducing us to Tom, and we're gonna proceed to Tom right now. We're gonna start with Tom giving us some background on the 8th Air Force. Let me make sure I get this part right here. I think I've got it pretty good here. There we go. Everybody seeing that okay?
Perfect.
We're good? Okay. So obviously, the 9th Air Force is not brought up, as far as I know, at all in the Masters of the Air episode, yet it plays a very important role in the air war over Europe. And tonight we want to recognize Ed Catrell and his role in the 9th Air Force. And we were very fortunate to get Tom Hughes on through Don Patton as our expert, if you will. Tom, these are the 2 books you have published, and the one I read when it first came out was Overlord, General Pete Quesada and the Triumph of Tactical Air Power in World War II. I don't think I've read the Bill Halsey book, but I'd like to. Why did you write about Pete Quesada? Tom? Did we lose Tom?
There you go. Now I can unmute. You hear me?
Yeah, now we got you.
Well, I was in graduate school and I was searching for a topic, and the chief historian of the Air Force at the time was a mentor of mine, a guy named Dick Cohn. And I was talking to him, and he was a very senior historian to a very young graduate student. But he said, I was just interviewing this guy, Pete Quesada, and he's pretty interesting, and no one's really written about him. And no one's really written about this part of the air war. And why don't you give him a call and see if he'll visit with you? And so I did. General Quesada was probably 3 years from the end of his life at that point, and we got to know each other a little bit, and I got fascinated with the story. This book is not my title. I was a young man, and the Free Press was interested in publishing it. And so I was thrilled, and I was going to do basically whatever they told me to do, and they wanted me to call it Overlord. But my working title, and it fits into your theme tonight, Glenn, was The Other Air War. Meaning there's this other huge air war besides the bomber war in World War II. The 9th Air Force is, in fact, a larger Air Force than the 8th Air Force. And the 12th Air Force, the Tactical Air Force in Italy, is a larger Air Force than the 15th Air Force, the Strategic Air Force in Italy.
Larger in what terms? Number of aircraft?
Yeah, good. People assigned. And there's different ways to understand size. But yeah, assigned personnel. And so I started writing about this fella, and my timing as a biographer, another friend of mine who's quite senior to me in the profession told me once, your timing on that book was perfect. And I was trying to wonder why he said that, because I didn't know quite what he meant by that, but what he meant by that is I started this project when General Quesada was alive and we could visit and I could learn from him. But by the time it showed up, he had left this earth. And so it allowed me to say, well, I talked to him and this is what he said. And that's the end of the story. And he was not around to respond. And he was just being sort of lighthearted. I tried not to convey anything that General Quesada wouldn't have. Well, I disagreed with some of his memories, but I tried not to take that advantage of it. So that's how I kind of fell into this project, Glenn. This project 30 years ago.
Yeah, well, it turned an excellent product. I remember reading it when it first came out. What, in 2001, 2000?
No, this is a long time ago. This is 1995, 1996, something like that.
I was in grade school when I read it. That's right.
Yeah.
So here's a picture of General Quesada, 3 stars. This would have been right at the height of the war, I imagine. What was his background? I remember talking to you the other day and remembering the book. He was not a West Pointer, which is
No, he wasn't. He's born in 1904 in Washington, D.C. His dad is a Spanish banker who's in this country on business and a long-term resident of the country here. And his mother is an Irish American Catholic girl, and they born in 1904, and he goes into the flying cadet program in the mid 1920s after a degree as an undergraduate at the University of Maryland. So he is not a West Point guy. He learns to fly. He's in the same cadet flying class in San Antonio as Charles Lindbergh. And earns a commission in the Army Air Corps in 1926 and is on his way. By the war, he's a relatively young general. He is a 2-star general through most of the war, and he achieves that rank at the age of 37. This is a picture of him in 1936 in one of the 6 plane crashes. He survived, 3 of which the investigative report blames him for the accident. All the while developing a terrific reputation as a great pilot. Flying was different then. I don't think you'd get many chances to crash a 7th time in the United States Air Force today. And even when people like Colonel Catrell and others were flying 10 years after this, I think if you crash your airplane 3 times and it's your fault, it's sort of baseball and you're out. So I just kind of put that picture, and that's a picture. That particular accident is just outside of the base that I teach at, Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama, and that is him looking at his handiwork as a first lieutenant.
Lucky to have survived.
Lucky to have survived, but yeah, and people died in plane crashes all the time. But these planes didn't move at the speed at which even planes during World War II moved. This plane would have had a cruising indicated airspeed of 125 indicated knots. I mean, that's fast enough to die, but it wasn't unusual to die, but it wasn't unusual to walk away as he did. He got out of that cockpit and walked away from that crash.
And you're sitting there, as you said, at Maxwell Air Force Base, which hopefully our viewers are familiar with that name because we've talked about quite a bit the bomber mafia, so-called bomber mafia that was located at Maxwell Air Force Base in the 30s. That came up with the daylight strategic bombing theories and put them into practice with the B-20 or the B-17 and the Norden bomb sight, et cetera, et cetera. How did Pete Quesada not get caught up in that as a young man and try to get into heavy bombers? What got him into the tactical element of the Air Force?
Yeah, he went to the Air Corps Tactical School as a student, as a captain in 1937. And the faculty, if you've read the Gladwell book, you have a general sense of the sort of curriculum. I teach at a school at Air University called the School of Advanced Air and Space Studies. And that is a lineal descendant of the Air Corps Tactical School. The Air Force to this day has all of its officer education, with the exception of the Air Force Academy here at Maxwell. This is why the base is here. And he managed to kind of he didn't disavow bomber theory, and he believed in it. You're acculturated that way as an Air Corps officer in the 1930s. It was hard not to become a believer, and there's a lot to believe that's good about that theory. Not perfect, but he kind of kept an open mind through all of this. And it was an open enough mind that when he is assigned to a tactical Air Force in World War II, he just digs into that job. He digs into the job that is given to him. I think had he been assigned to the 8th Air Force, he would have dug into that, and he would have done everything he could to make the bombardment of Germany a success. so he just has a kind of an open mind and a sort of a professional's attitude about the job the system has given him and has assigned him, and he's just going to do that job as well as he can. And so he goes through a series of typical jobs in the 30s. This is a photo that gets me into the war, and so I just want to make a quick transition if I can.
Sure, of course.
He's a flying aide to many general officers during the interwar period, and he develops this reputation as a great pilot, as I said. He is one of the fair-haired boys of Hap Arnold by about 1940. And the interwar Army Air Corps is a small group of people. There is about, in terms of career participants, people that would spend 20 years in the Army Air Corps, about 600 people in the Army Air Corps in the 1930s. There's more people that are coming and going, but career pilots, there's about 600. So they know each other pretty well after a series of years, and he's closely associated with some senior people. He goes to North Africa in the summer of 1942 to get involved in the war, and he is the deputy commander as a one-star, very young one-star general, to a British commander, a guy named Hugh P. Lloyd, in the Northwest African Air Force's Coastal Command, the kind of interdiction command in the Mediterranean. And that's where he kind of cuts his teeth in wartime command. And he's lucky to have Hugh P. Lloyd with him, because Lloyd's another name that's sort of forgotten, but he was the Malta garrison commander early in the war, when Malta shines as basically the only shining bright spot in the British Empire overseas. And he's just a very seasoned guy. Quesada will leave that role in the fall of 1943 and go and become the first general officer assigned to the 9th Air Force, which is building up in England at the time, about the time John Luckadoo gets there. And they're building, 9th Air Force existed in the Med, but the personnel of the 9th Air Force stays in the Med, and the name nomenclature of the 9th comes up, and it's built from scratch from units coming from the United States. And they start to do things like escort and training and getting ready for D-Day. This is the 9th Air Force is composed of a fighter command and a bomber command, a medium bomber command, your first photo here, Glenn, of the B-25. A troop carrier command, those are the C-47s. Those are the people that drop the airborne troops. A reconnaissance wing, and then a signal corps wing, and an engineering command, which is huge, the engineering command. One of the things they did a whole lot of before D-Day, this is actually a photo from an after-action report. This is a bomb group, a medium bomb group, a B-25. You can kind of read it there on the 25th of April. That is Pointe de Hoc.
Oh, wow.
Kind of an iconic spot in Normandy. And Pointe de Hoc was bombed 13 times by the American bombers of the 9th Air Force before D-Day. And the 9th Air Force was very busy in all kinds of interdiction missions before D-Day. That's generally what they were doing. I think the next photo, Glenn, might show Rouen, with the famous cathedral in the background. I'm not so sure how.
No, the next photo is yeah, there it is. Yeah.
Well, I guess it's kind of it's faded out there, but that's the Seine River in the background there. The steeple, you can kind of make it out, as the famous Rouen Cathedral, where at the foot of which Joan of Arc is martyred a long time before World War II. And they're interdicting not only coastal defenses, but they're not only prepping coastal defense areas, but they're also interdicting riverways. And the Seine River and the Loire River form kind of a natural interdiction point around the Normandy battlefield. And that's what they're doing generally a whole lot of in the months before D-Day. But it's an interesting story. And if you'll indulge me for 30 seconds.
Of course.
The enemy's not stupid, and the Germans aren't stupid. And we are trying to convince them as a Western coalition that the place the invasion is coming is the Pas de Calais. very much to the north, right across the Straits of Dover. And the Germans have placed a lot of their better defensive units in the Pas-de-Calais area. And we don't want them to know we're coming to Normandy. But if we interdict that Normandy area too much, they'll figure out, oh, this is the area they are trying to isolate along these riverways, the Seine and the Loire River. So in the early weeks of this interdiction effort in March and April, for every interdiction mission that is designed to interdict the Normandy battlefield, the 9th Air Force must fly 3 interdiction missions elsewhere that will never matter tactically, but will matter greatly operationally and strategically if the deception holds. And so we bombed the Pas-de-Calais far more than we ever bombed the Normandy area before D-Day on June 6th. Now, as you get closer, as you get about 6 weeks out, that ratio goes from 1 to 3 to 1 to 2. And then about 2 weeks out, it goes to 1 to 1. Every mission in the Normandy interdiction area, they're still flying a mission elsewhere. And they hang on to that even weeks after the D-Day invasion of June 6th. They only stop doing that when the Germans pull their panzer units out of the Pas-de-Calais on June 19th, 1944. They finally decide, you know what, they aren't coming here. They're already where they were going to come, and we've got to get our guys down there. And once we see that, then we stop that effort. So this interdiction effort that the 9th Air Force is doing before the battle is extraordinary. And that's what they are mostly doing before D-Day. Once the forces get on the far shore, then you get into the kind of the close air support and close interdiction of the battlefield. And I think these next pictures sort of depict that a little bit, Glenn.
One question about this bridge being,
Yep.
So this would have been taken down by the 9th Air Force. Would these have been P-47s like Ed flew, or B-25s, or what? What weapon would we have used?
A great question. Do you know what people actually mean when they say, "Oh, that's a great question"? They actually mean, "Oh, I think I have the answer." And I think I have the answer. They started with there was a kind of an intuition that bigger planes and bigger bombs were better than smaller planes and smaller bombs on these bridge targets. And some of our veterans here might be able to add to this. And so medium bombers did a lot of this at the front end of these efforts, but they weren't actually very good at it. And they worked their way through a series of learning curves. And the 9th Air Force is a learning organization here because the interwar Air Force spends so much time thinking about strategic bombing, but not a lot of time thinking about this. So a lot of this stuff has to be worked out on the fly. Bridges are hard to bomb. They're hard to take down. And what they learned is that smaller planes with smaller bombs and actually flying the plane into the target and using the plane as a sort of a proxy of a guided missile and a guided bomb. And they stopped trying to go after the bridge themselves, but they started to try to bomb the bridge embankments, the abutments, where they come into the soil again, where they come into the earth on the banks, and weaken the embankments and collapse the embankments around the bridges. And they get pretty good at it by the end. If you ever go to the Normandy cemetery, at the front of the cemetery, you know, there's beautiful maps that sort of explain what is being commemorated there, along with the 9,000 headstones and 3,500 MIA names. One of the maps show this interdiction effort along the Loire and the Seine River, and just how totally interdicted this area was. But it was a real hard nut to crack. First, big bombs, big planes, and then smaller planes, smaller bombs, flying the bombs into the actual abutments of the bridge on the edges of the bridge.
No. Let's ask Ed. Ed, in your P-47 55 missions, did you bomb any bridges? Do you have any?
I would say that it probably anywhere from 5 to 10 of my missions were specifically targeted were bridges. And almost every bridge that we went after was very heavily protected by anti-aircraft, and also not so much by fighters. They depended on their anti-aircraft, and you couldn't get very close with all the flak that they flew up around those bridges.
Dangerous missions.
Yeah. There was also a lot of 50 caliber machine guns up and down the banks. And before you ever got to the bridge, you had to go through 50 caliber machine guns because you were coming in at a sort of a low level approach to the bridge, so that if you dropped your bombs, they would be moving towards the bridge rather than just go into the water if you went straight down.
And what sort of bombs were you dropping?
We were
200?
dropping 250 pounders most of the time. Every once in a while, we carried a 500 pounder, but most of our bombs that we carried were 250, and we had two of them.
Two 250s or one 500?
Right. One now, we could carry two 500s, but there was the 47 didn't handle that well with that heavy of a bomb load. You could carry 1,000 pound under the belly and you had no trouble flying, but you put two 500 pounds under the wings and it was a little more difficult to control the plane.
Yeah.
250s were great.
Okay. Well, we're going to get more into that here in a few more minutes. The next slide here, Tom.
The other thing that they had to learn on the far shore was how to coordinate with the ground forces and how to actually do close air support. Again, not a lot of thinking went into that before the war. And the various air forces, the tactical air forces around the world are working through it. This is actually a bomb line marker. Those white rectangle tarps
yeah.
is part of marking of a bomb line. This is actually a pretty unusual photo. There's not a lot of photos like this. This is near St. Lo in Normandy. This road there, that long straight road, was also a proxy bomb line, and this is right before a major breakthrough in late July of 1944 when George Patton's Third Army finally breaks out through this tough German defensive crust in Normandy and begins
the famous Operation Cobra, where the heavies were used.
This is part of Operation Cobra. That's right, Glenn.
Was the Air Force involved in Operation Cobra as well, in the bombing of that area there just in behind St. Lo or south of St. Lo?
I'm sorry, was the 9th Air Force involved in it?
Yes.
Oh yeah, yep. Yeah, this was a full up effort, and it actually leads to the largest single episode of air fratricide in the war because it's a lot because of the ways in which the planes came into the bomb line, either perpendicular or parallel, and a kind of a navigational error. And 169 American troops are killed by American bombs on the 26th or 7th, on the 26th of July, including the senior American officer killed in combat during the entire war, Lieutenant General Leslie McNair, who was the ground training forces commander in Washington, D.C. during the war, and he was overseas on a battlefield tour, and he died in that fratricide incident.
So when I first saw this, I'm like, they're hanging a curtain. What's this all about?
Well, the other of the many things they had to do, and much like the comment earlier about the Masters of the Air, the human dimension that series is bringing out, and not just the missions, and they're certainly central to any of these stories. This isn't a human dimension, but a technical dimension. This is one of 9. This is just one corner of one of 9 communication nodes that had to be moved every time an airfield moved. because close air support was only as good as the degree to which you could talk as pilots to ground people on the front lines to coordinate very tight close air support missions. And so those are communication lines. The Signal Corps, the 9th Air Force Signal Corps, moves this stuff 9 times, moves 9 of these things a dozen or more times in the first 12 weeks of the air campaign in the summer of 1944. And
once they're on the continent.
On the continent, once they're on the continent, that's right, in the summer of 1944. And what they're trying to work out here is something called armored column cover, where airplanes are flying directly above advancing troops, and they're trying to figure out how the airplane pilot himself can talk to the tank commander himself in real time. And that is not how they were set up doctrinally. That's not how they were set up technically. And they had to, the radios were different in a tank than in a plane. This is just a piece of that story. One of the little learning curves they had to develop here is that once they figured out how to talk to each other in real time, and senior officers frankly got out of the way and let a second lieutenant and a sergeant talk to each other and figure out what to do, and the major and the colonel and the general just kind of getting out of the way, and that was hard for senior officers to do sometimes, is that the vocabulary of a pilot and a ground officer was very different. So the sergeant in the tank would say, yeah, my target, the Germans that are keeping me pinned down here, they're over by that church steeple. Well, and if you're at 3,000 feet and you're looking at the countryside in Normandy or in France or in Belgium or anywhere in Europe, basically, well, you're looking at 24 church steeples. Well, which church steeple or which this? And what they had to do is get pilots into the tanks at the front end of armored column cover, and that was a hard thing to do. Pete Quesada was not inclined to order his pilots into a ground tank so that they could talk to other pilots in the way pilots would understand about where a target was.
And is this ringing any bells for you in terms of your experience in the 55 missions?
Well, a lot of our missions were after tanks, if you could spot them or if you knew where they were. The tanks themselves, we got most of our information from our troops who were very close to where the Germans were their tanks, because their tanks stayed pretty close to their front lines.
Did you, Ed, directly have any air to ground communication in your airplane, or was it all with your squadron commander?
It was all with our squadron commander. Once we took off on a mission, and if we were going to do a bomb run, the only person that talked was the flight commander. There was the commander of the air. Unless you got into combat or you were hit or something happened, but he controlled the whole radio.
Okay. So maybe we move along here, Tom.
Yep.
I love finding these pictures of people who we don't really know who they are until people like you can explain who they are. Who is one is obviously General Quesada.
Yeah, just real briefly here toward the end of my thing, and then we can get into what everybody wants to hear about these stories of these folks that are still around with us today, which is terrific. This is Pete Quesada. You see him on the right. That's Hoyt Vandenberg, who becomes a chief of staff of the Air Force after the war. Hoyt Vandenberg is, by this point in the war, the commander of the 9th Air Force, and Quesada is his immediate subordinate. These two men have a fairly fraught relationship. They are about the same age. They come up at the same time, and they don't quite get along personally all that well, but they learn to work with each other. Pete Quesada lives a long, long time until 1993. Hoyt Vandenberg gets ill and dies on active duty as the chief of staff of the Air Force in 1951 or 2.
Oh, wow. And this is the Vandenberg, as in Vandenberg Air Force Base.
This is Vandenberg Air Force Base. That's correct.
Okay, interesting. I love the 1940s cigarette sort of pose there. That's
And you were not allowed to put your hands in your pockets. I'm just saying.
Well, you weren't, but that's a 2-star general, and maybe he's taking a little license.
And what is this story?
Well, this is General Quesada and Dwight Eisenhower, who's of course 3 or 4 echelons up in the command chain. But this is in late July 1944, shortly, just days after Operation Cobra, and the front lines are very fluid. And Pete Quesada is briefing General Quesada is briefing General Eisenhower about the movement on the front line, and Eisenhower says, "I'd really like to see it." And so they actually take a gas tank out of this that's a P-51 out of the back seat of a P-51, and put a lawn chair back there, or what you would think of as a lawn chair, and stuff him in there. And this 2-star and this 4-star general fly around with is a part of a 2-ship. There's just one other plane with them, and they roam around for about 45 minutes, even well behind enemy lines. This little joyride earned both of them a personal rebuke from President Roosevelt, but they're happy in this picture before Roosevelt gets a hold of this story.
Boys will be boys.
These two had a very close relationship. President Eisenhower appointed Pete Quesada as the first head of the Federal Aviation Administration, the FAA, in the 1950s, and Quesada, as a civilian, is the FAA works out the air routes and the air navigation aids that we still basically use today in commercial aviation in this country.
And this is our last photo of Pete, and who's he with?
That's O.P. Weiland. That's an immediate subordinate of Pete Quesada, another fighter general in the 9th Air Force. And in this picture, he is responsible. O.P. Weiland is the guy responsible for the close air support for the 3rd Army, George Patton's army. George Patton, of course, famously says after that breakout that his air component protecting his flanks and forging ahead was worth at least a corps on the ground. And so that's who that is, O.P. Weiland. Relationships were important always, of course, in the course of human events.
So to give you the opportunity to put Pete Quesada, General Quesada, in his proper place historically, what would you say is he should be remembered for relative to World War II?
Well, he is one of these guys that grabs a hold of the task in front of him, whatever that may have been, and is instrumental in this learning curve of close air support and tactical air power in 1943 and 44. He's a young guy. He's not hidebound. He has some growing pains as a commander. He goes from major to 1-star general in 13 months. And those are important seasoning field grade ranks where you learn to deal with people. And he has some shortcomings that way. But technically, he understood radar. Technically, he understood communications. Technically, he understood the mind of a 22-year-old fella better than a 47-year-old would. And he was able to kind of ride this learning curve, whether it be that bomb line, whether it be communication structures, whether it be how to take a bridge out. So that by the fall of 1944, by the time of the winter, there is a lot of fighting left, and there was a lot of dying and a lot of sacrificing, and the outcome is in doubt. The basic system with which the tactical air forces will use for the last 6-8 months of the war exists, and it exists in some measurable way because of Pete Quesada. That he's not the only guy, of course, but that's what I would say is his contribution to the war.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah. Let's pause here and take some questions before we get into Ed's story.
Well, my question is this. In the 1920s and 30s, by the time of the end of the Spanish Civil War, the Marine Corps had mastered air-to-ground control and air support because they would take Marine pilots out of the cockpit, train them to be forward observers. So the forward observer for the Marines on a beach could talk to the Marine and Navy pilots like he was talking about. They understood the same language. They understood they could have the same maps, whatever. But General Geiger, proposed using this method to the Army Air Corps. And I don't remember which general, high-ranking general told him, but he said, we don't need any of that witchcraft. We know what we're doing. But the Marine Corps and the Navy had a wonderful relationship with their ground support and air support. The Marine Air Ground Task Force, the MAGTF, as we know it in the Marines, but I'm surprised. I was totally stunned. Even the Germans didn't have that. It's like the Marine Corps was the only branch of service in any military in World War II that actually had a handle on it.
Yeah, and you're right. Roy Geiger is the guy, and of course he becomes a very, very senior fella out in the Pacific War. The only airman that commands an army on the island of Okinawa by the end of the war. That was Oscar Westover, who was the chief of the Air Corps in the latter part of the 1930s, that eschews the Marine Corps idea. Hindsight, gives a clarity to this stuff that they didn't have at the time. Even inside of the Army Air Forces, this system is being worked out in the 12th Air Force in Italy. It's being worked out in the 5th Air Force in Papua New Guinea. At about the same time, it's being worked out in the 9th Air Force. And it's amazing. They don't really know what the other numbered air forces are doing. There's not enough communicative infrastructure inside the bureaucracy of the Army Air Forces to work that communication. The amazing thing is, it was called Armored Column Cover in the 9th Air Force. The 12th Air Force called it a Rover Joe system. Whatever they called it, the solutions bear more similarities than differences. Just independently working through this problem. But you're absolutely right that the Marine Corps is just way ahead of the Army on this stuff, and it comes from their experience in Central America, I think, in the 1920s and 30s.
Yeah. Let's see, Don Patton raising his hand. Don, can we hear you?
Tom, want to say hi to you. Tom came up and did a wonderful program for us with a gentleman by the name of Ken Dahlberg. But my question is, Ken Dahlberg actually flew P-51s initially, and then he flew P-47s. I know he had a close relationship with Quesada because he told some stories about his relationship with Quesada. But what was that transition? How did that transition work for for pilots like Dahlberg that went from a P-51 to a P-47? Did they change air forces? How did they transition aircraft?
Well, I don't know. I don't want to tread too much on the veterans here. They may have a great insight here. That wasn't all that common. That wasn't all that uncommon to move from platform to platform. It wasn't common, but it wasn't rare. They had to kind of relearn some characteristics. Those two planes in particular are pretty different planes. But the movement there wasn't. I wouldn't call it rare. I don't know. Some of the veterans. How would you answer that question of Colonel Patton's?
Ed, any thought there, Ed?
I know that out of our 48th Fighter Group, we had two pilots that left to transfer to 51s, and we had one 51 pilot transfer into fly 47s, and that's the only thing that we never thought about it.
But they had different missions, right?
They were absolutely different missions. My 65 missions, I only flew one escort mission. All my other missions were ground support. I never got close to a B-17 or 24 because we didn't have enough gas to take them far. And by the time we ran out of gas, we hadn't met up with them yet. So I really never saw a B-17 or a 24 on a bombing mission.
One of the interesting things, the P-47s come into the theater assigned to the 8th Air Force generally. And the idea is they're going to be the escort aircraft. And the P-51s come into the theater, and as they come off the ships and get uncrated, they're actually going to go to the 9th Air Force. But they learned very quickly that the planes should be swapped. That the P-51, a liquid-cooled engine way up high in the air, was probably a better escort plane. And the P-47, this big, ugly, heavy, rugged, air-cooled engine that could take all kinds of abuse close to the ground, was a better close air support plane. And in theater, they just sort of worked that swap, people confronting problems and not being overly concerned about red tape and what the plan was back in Washington, D.C.
And that's the story we're going to have next week with David and Margaret White and Joe Peterburs. Is the story of the P-51, and that transition took place, but the issue was it could have taken place a lot earlier in 43 than it did, right? Had certain factors been in place. Joe, any comment on this question from Don, Joe Peterburs? I know Joe's had some problems with his internet off and on. He told me that last week, and he might not be on this right at this moment.
See, let me just interject one other thing. We also did a program with a fellow named Steve Burke, who did a book called Beyond the Beach, I think it was, and it was about the peripheral bombing of the targets that Tom had mentioned earlier.
Okay, they're talking to you now.
Oh, hey, I'm on.
Hey, Joe.
Joe,
after being knocked off the net for every 5 seconds or so. But anyway, have you had some questions? I haven't heard anything.
well, Joe, maybe get you to comment on, we were talking about, there was one pilot, Don Patton mentioned, who transitioned from P-47s to P-51s. Apparently that was not that common. And, we're going to get into your story next week with the Whites. Let me ask you this. You were flying P-51s. I know you were with the 8th Air Force, correct? Joe? Geez, we'll have to work that out before next week with Joe.
Yeah, we lost Joe again.
What I was going to say, and then we need to move on to Ed's story here. Joe, I know his story very well, as many of us do. He flew escort, but then once they were released from escort, he flew in effect, strafing missions on the ground, and in effect tactical missions, strafing transportation, strafing airfields, that sort of thing. And that's eventually what gets him shot down near the end of the war. Strafing an airfield, then he gets caught in some anti-aircraft fire. But not before he shoots down that ME-262, which is pretty interesting. Okay, let's pause here, Todd. You want to take a station break, and then we'll get
I do. But first I want to say, Tom, I wish I had you as a professor. I can't remember the last time I've learned so much in 1 hour. This is really fascinating to me. I feel like I didn't know anything about the 9th Air Force and the missions. So thank you very much for this education you've given me personally. And this is the kind of thing that we do at the Veterans Breakfast Club. We talk about the military community, past and present. We ask veterans to share stories, and then love to have experts like Tom coming on to share his expertise with us. We'll be doing it again Monday night. This time the subject will be the M16, the famous or infamous M16 in Vietnam. I've talked to so many veterans over the years of Vietnam who had problems with the M16. And so we're having a veteran on, Bob Orkind, who wrote a book called Misfire, which is really the most comprehensive and readable history of the M16 you could get. Please join us Monday night for that conversation if you can. You could also, of course, we also always archive our programs on YouTube and Facebook and on our website if you can't. We'll be back 1 week from tonight, as Glenn said, with Joe Peterburs and David White, talking about the P-51 fighter escorts in World War II. And I do want to acknowledge our wonderful sponsor, Tobacco Free Adagio Health. They are dedicated to preventing and reducing tobacco use, educating people about the hazards of tobacco use and vaping, and advocating for healthier places to live, work, and play. If you're looking to quit, or you know somebody who would like to quit smoking, they have a very helpful quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. That's 1-800-QUIT-NOW, and you can learn more at tobaccofree.adagiohealth.org. UPMC for Life came on board as a sponsor this year. We're very grateful to them. They can help you make sense of Medicare, get the answers and information you need, such as how to choose the Medicare Advantage plan that's right for you. UPMC for Life has plans designed for veterans by veterans that can save you money and get you more benefits. And you could learn all about your options at upmchealthplan.com/Medicare. I keep on promising that this magazine is going to hit your mailboxes. It hasn't hit mine yet, and I don't think it's hit anybody's yet. But man, this time I really mean it. It's going to be on your doorstep soon. We send them out to 9,000 households and print up another 8,000 of them for hand distribution. I should be getting a box loads shortly. If you don't get it in your mail, it's because we don't have your address. Just let me know if you want to receive the magazine. Todd Hudd at veteransbreakfastclub.org. And finally, we have a survey. We've been learning a lot and changing up kind of how we do things, big and small, according to the survey responses that we get back. I'm going to put a survey link, a link to the survey. It takes 2.5 minutes to fill out. What do you think about the program? How can we improve it? And I'll put a link to it here in the Zoom chat. And if you could fill it out and let us know how we could fix whatever is broken, please do tell us how we could improve our programming. All right, back to you, Glenn.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we've been fortunate to have Ed on with us, and Tom, thank you very much. And please, let's be part of this conversation with Ed. Let me pull up some photos of Ed here. Give me a second. Get my mouse to work. Okay, we seeing that okay?
Yeah.
Ed, do you remember this fellow?
I remember that. That was taken over in Cambrai right after I joined the 48th Fighter Group.
And you were a member of the 48th Fighter Group, which is still in service in Europe today.
Right. They're based in England, and they're very much involved with the Ukraine situation. But it's not the 48th Fighter Group anymore. I think it's a 48th combat, the big
combat wing.
Yeah, wing.
It's a wing. Yeah.
But they have the 493rd Fighter Squadron is still in effect.
And I bet you
a man named John Otter is the commander of the 493rd right now.
Yeah.
And they're flying F-15s, I think I read.
They're up to F-35s now. They just transitioned over from F-15s to 35s.
Little faster than this guy was.
Yeah, a little bit faster.
Now, is this
the Razorback?
Is this the earlier version?
That's the earlier version of the 47. That's the Razorback.
Razorback. Okay, and I have a few a few other photos as well. And the P-47 came into production, Tom, what, 41? The exact year doesn't matter, but
Yeah, let's go with 4041. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly when it would have shown up in production. It exists. It exists in 1939 in prototype, but I'm not so sure when it would have been produced en masse.
But as you said earlier, it was the sort of primary airplane of the 8th Air Force in 42, 43. I know there were P-38s around as well, but and this is the famous engine. Ed, tell us about the engine.
That's the Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, 18 cylinders, and I'll guarantee you it is one great engine. And if it weren't for that engine, I would not be sitting here talking to you people tonight. That engine performed when it had no right to be functioning.
So explain that for us. What happened on that mission, and how did it save your life?
This is a mission that happened on December 17th, which at that time we didn't know, but was really the second day of the Battle of the Bulge. I think the Battle of the Bulge, officially they said it started on the 16th, but on the 17th, 12 of us were told we were going to be, our first mission was to look for some German tanks that were supposedly outside of Koblenz. And if we couldn't find them, then we were to attack one of two bridges on the Rhine River, maybe the Rhine River, I think it was the Rhine. But anyway, we get down close to Koblenz, and our squadron commander, Major Latchley, spotted the Tiger tanks in the woods, and I'm flying wing to the third man in the first four, and he's I'm his wingman, and unfortunately during this mission, he did get shot down, and I blame myself because I wasn't there to protect him. But I'm the fourth man on the bomb run, and after we drop our bombs, we're starting to pull up, and I noticed up to my right an ME-109, and I can see him shooting at our squadron commander, Major Latchley, and I called him, said there was a bandit at 1 o'clock, and he said, yeah, I know, a bullet just went by me. And then all of a sudden the 109 made a slight turn, and I could see the flickering of the cannon, and all of a sudden there was one tremendous pop, and hot oil came all over my windshield. And immediately the Pratt & Whitney engine started to misfire, and I had to level out to keep it going. I threw back the canopy, and I called Jim Watson, who was the man that I was flying wing to, told him I was hit, and my squadron commander said head 270, so I started heading west 270, and I'm maybe at 2,000 feet going at 130 mile an hour, and a P-47 doesn't move very fast at 135. It's hard to keep airborne because it's so heavy, and you can't see. There's oil all over my windshield, and it's hot and stinky and smelly. And I'm flying along, and all of a sudden to my right, I see an ME-109 come in next to me. And on the left, there's a ME-109, and the two of them pull in front of me. And then they may peel off, and they start to go behind me. And like every other pilot, I knew this was the end, because pilots don't go behind you for any other reason to fire their guns. And I waited for the firing, nothing happened, and all of a sudden I looked, and there was the 147 was very close to me on the right. The other was very close on the left. They had their canopies open, and we're flying along, and I'm chugging and chugging, and the oil's still coming out. And maybe I have no idea how long. It might have been 2 minutes. It might have been 5 minutes. All of a sudden, they put their finger and thumb, the first finger and thumb together. They peeled off and left me. And I'm heading 270. I have no idea where I am. I got on my radio. Fortunately, the radio still worked. Asked if anybody heard my transmission. They asked me what my guy came on and said, "What's your airfield?" I said, A92. He said, "You're not too far. Turn right 70 degrees and you'll run into it." And surprisingly, it was no reason I didn't recognize, because we never flew south of the air base at St. Tron. Everything was done north of the airfield. I never flew south of the airfield. When we took off, we always turned north, never turned south. When we come in, we flew over Aachen and went north to come into St. Tron to land. So I had no idea where I was. I chugging along, and I see the landing strip ahead of me, and I get very close to coming in. I'm going to go straight in, and maybe 100 yards from the runway, the engine stops. It freezes over, and I very luckily was able to guide the 47 in. It fell very quickly, believe me. A 47 with no engine doesn't stay in the air very long. It's pretty heavy. And so I was fortunate to make the runway. I coasted, and I'm like lucky over here. I got out of the plane and kissed the ground. Thank the Lord. If it weren't for that Pratt & Whitney engine, I would not be sitting here today. The next day, the crew chief told me that I lost 8 out of the 18 cylinders. Lost 8 of them were shot out.
Wow.
And there were bullet holes all over the plane. I don't know how that plane flew. I have no idea.
Well, as Tom said, it's a testament to the plane itself. It's sort of the B-17 of the fighters. Could take tons of punishment. Todd, is this the print that we have, that you have? Is there a print about? Is that what the print is for?
There is, and let me get it. And let me just say also, I've been watching Corky Romeo. Corky is a fellow pilot. Father was a B-17 pilot, I believe. And as you were telling the story, Ed, I saw that Corky was just as absorbed in it as I was. So it's such it gives me chills to hear that story. Let me get that print, and then I'll put it up when I have it.
Okay. So let me go back to sharing the screen, because there's a couple of other shots that we wanted to show of P-47s and Ed's story. Are we seeing are you seeing this again now?
Yeah.
Okay,
there's the front. The 18 cylinders are in the front.
Yeah. Amazing piece of machinery, right? So this is another shot of a P-47. Is that a fuel tank underneath it, or is that a bomb?
Yeah, that's a belly tank.
Belly tank. Yeah.
That's a fuel tank.
And
those are the 850s that are firing as you go down. You can see them on the wing.
850s.
4 on each wing. We had 850 caliber machine guns.
Well, is this some sort of rocket, air to ground rocket?
They had some air to ground rockets, but we never had them.
You never did. Okay.
No, the most we had were the 850 calibers and either 250s or 500 pounders, and but the 850s really could do damage. I mean, when you start firing those 850s, you did nothing more than just flick the trigger and it put out a burst. And those 850s went out and crossed, and they just tore things apart.
We're talking about 8 different 50 caliber machine guns,
Right.
4 each wing, which I can imagine the firepower coming out of. And this P-47 is the more updated version.
That's the bubble canopy. That's
bubble.
the P-47N, and that's the last. That was the second 47 that I flew. When I got my own plane, I got a bubble canopy one. The one that I got hit in was George Pullis's plane, and it was a Razorback.
More like this.
More like that.
Now, one thing I want to emphasize to the audience to make sure, I'm pretty sure everybody understands this. Did you just take back the screen, Todd? Great. Okay. So let's talk about this first, and then this next point.
Yeah, this is a print that just came out last week. Was published by Valor Studios, and this is my P-47, and these are the actual markings of the plane that I flew, our Mary. That's George Pullis's plane. You can see the oil coming out of the cowling and on the windshield. And if you look up in the ME up in the upper left-hand corner, you can see the pilot looking down at me, and I'm looking at him. And when this print was first done, they had markings on the ME-109s. In December of this past December, I had the actual opportunity to speak with a Luftwaffe pilot that got shot down in the same battle that I got hit. He got shot down by one of my fellow pilots, and I got hit by one of his fellow pilots. He bailed out, got injured bailing out, and survived on the ground. And during my 4 hours of talking with him, he told me that when he landed the ground, people came up to him, and a guy came up and pulled a pistol out of his pocket and said, "Are you German or American?" And he said, "I'm German." And the guy put the pistol away, and he said, "What would you have done?" And I said, "I was an American." He said, "I'd have shot you." And this is what the pilot who flew one of these, he didn't fly these planes, but he flew a 49 out of this squadron. So these are the actual markings of the German 109s of the planes that I was in combat on that mission. And it's very rare that you would find two pilots, one shot down, completely had to bail out. The other should have probably bailed out, and get together 4 years, 80 years later. And we have his signature and my signature are available on these prints. They just got his signatures maybe a week ago, and they're now available to be with this print. And as I understand, the prints are going very well. I can tell you that at the meeting at the Veterans Breakfast Club, when was that? In March?
November.
In when?
In March. He's thinking of the birthday party.
Yeah. I brought a proof where we auctioned off, and some lady paid $1,000 to get that proof.
Oh.
If I would sign it.
She did, and I saw her recently, and she's a younger woman who's not super educated in World War II, and she said that she has these people who found that she had the print and are asking to come to her house because they want to see it.
Yeah.
And they want to hear the story.
I get a lot of phone calls asking if they buy a print, will I sign them? Well, the prints, I signed 1,500 copies of this print in last April before it was ever printed. It's a I happen to have the oil, actual oil painting of the artist that painted this picture. And it's a rarity. I might say we're probably running out of time. I've had the opportunity to go over to France. I lost 2 roommates through the Battle of the Bulge. Art Summers, the day that I got hit on the 17th, he got shot down by a 109. He bailed out. He was captured by the SS in turn and then shot right after he finished the internment. The civilians in that town, when the SS left, buried him. He's since been moved to his family, moved his back to California. My wingman, the man that I flew wing on that day, Jim Watson, was shot down. He's buried in Holland. And this last December, I had the opportunity to see visit Jim Watson's grave, which is in the same cemetery as my other roommate who got shot down January 1st, which is another story which we don't have time to tell. But he got shot down on January 1st. I visited his site. I've got parts of his plane that have been found from buried in the ground, and he's buried in the cemetery in Holland. So I've been to their grave twice, and it's very moving to visit your roommate's grave, knowing how they died.
Yeah. Wow. You're raising the hair on the back of my neck, Ed. One last point and one more story, Ed. I think we have enough time. Let me just share the screen because I'm not sure. I'm guessing most of the audience understands this, but I like making this point. Can you see this photo now? Did I share it correctly?
Yeah.
So, and Tom Hughes, please jump into this. So to be clear, Ed's missions, 65 missions, Ed?
Right.
65 missions were all flown from the continent of Europe in Europe, right? First in Belgium at Cambrai and then several more bases. And they kept moving these bases forward as the ground troops moved forward.
Right.
And this
we flew off of metal strips.
Right. And you were living in, I imagine, tents and mud.
Right.
And this is just a typical, I think, sort of picture of one of these temporary airfields that these men had to live in. It wasn't exactly luxury living conditions.
They actually still have the invasion markings on them. Those stripes, those white and black stripes on the leading edge of the wing. Those this is after the invasion, but that's one of the ways in which the Allies identified their own planes on the invasion days themselves.
That's our plane.
And you can see it taken off. I think you can make out the metal matting that is taking off from there.
Yep, that's Markston matting right there. It's yep.
Those conditions had to be very difficult, Ed.
One thing that I was fortunate for 5 months, I had the luxury of taking off and landing on a 10,000-foot runway. And that's a lot easier than landing on a 4,000-foot runway that has mud and water coming up as you touch down, and the prop throwing it all against your windshield and everything.
And this is what it could look like, right? You're flying close to the ground, you're targets that explode, and I'm sure many P-47 went down because of the explosions that
every mission, almost every mission that I flew, I came back with 50 caliber machine gun holes in my plane. I mean, if you strafed the railroad, they had 50 caliber machine guns. If you Army trucks, they had 50 caliber machine guns on their trucks. And every mission we flew, the 47 had bullet holes when you came back, and it kept flying. very rugged.
And Ed, just to finish up here, this is obviously current day or close to
Yeah,
current day.
This is in the study where I'm sitting right now. You can see it.
What are those various medals?
I've got the air medal with 8 clusters, and I've got the Belgian Legion of Merit. If somebody asked me about the French, and I talked with the French, and I said I was only there 3 weeks, and fellow said, "Well, I don't know whether that qualifies. How many missions did you fly?" And I said I flew 4 out of Cambrai before we moved to St. Tron. So I doubt whether the French would very much look to me as if I saved France. But it so happened that that's all the time that I was allotted in France. And that was right at the beginning of my service.
So you're saying, Ed, that you do not have a Legion of Honor?
No, I do not.
Okay, Eric, let's correct that. Thank you for letting us know. I thought that you had.
No.
Well, if Eric can do something about that, that'd be great. Plus, when we're in England with you in this September, Ed, we're definitely going to be buying you a couple of beers at some pubs.
That sounds good. That sounds good. And as I told you, Glenn, I'm hoping that I can get to see my 493rd Fighter Squadron when we're in England. I've been trying to meet up with them every time I go to Europe, but they are so much on high alert that it's very difficult to match up with them.
Well, Tom was telling us earlier before we started the program, he knows the people at the 48th wing, whatever, and that squadron, and he's going to help us get in touch with them. So we'll figure.
Good. I would love that.
The commander of that squadron is a man named John Ott today, and he's a student of mine, and I will that'll happen. I promise.
They might wonder what an old World War II veteran 47 pilot looks like.
They would love to see you. I just know it. They would be tickled as all get out.
Maybe they'll let you fly an F-15, Ed.
No, thank you. I want to live.
Okay, well, listen, we're approaching the end of the hour. I'm sorry we didn't have more time for questions. Todd, is there a couple of particular questions of Ed or Tom that we could end the program with?
We have Brad Washaball asked, why did the German fighters not shoot you down? Ed, do you have any idea?
I have no idea. The only thing I can say is if I were in the same situation and having been trained in athletics, you don't take advantage of somebody that can't defend themselves. And these 2 men probably saw that I couldn't defend themselves, and I don't think they would take much joy of taking advantage of somebody that can't help. And that's the way I would think. I would not have attacked an ME-109 if I were in the same situation.
That is interesting. Carol Popchalk, I know that you have a story from the 95th Bomb Group to share.
Yes, I happened to be speaking with a friend about a week ago, and he reminded me that his dad was a co-pilot in the 95th Bomb Group in the 8th Air Force. And he made it miraculously to his 35th mission, and told his son that when you hit that mark, you got to sit at what was called the lucky bastards table. I don't know if any of the pilots, on the show with us this evening can relate to that, but the lucky bastards table was a goal. And 2 weeks before my friend's dad hit that mission mark, another crew from their group beat them to that number 35 and was seated at the lucky bastards table when a commanding officer came over and asked them to go on one more mission. And the crew reluctantly said, okay. So they get in their plane, and the pilot proceeds to taxi down the runway and drive the plane purposely into a fuel truck that was down towards the runway. He drove his wing into the fuel truck. Everybody on the base, according to my friend's dad, knew about this. So 2 weeks later, his dad and their crew, they've hit mission 35. They're sitting at the Lucky Bastards table, and wouldn't you know it, a commanding officer comes over and asks them to go on one more mission. And his pilot said, yes, on one condition. You tell us where the fuel truck is gonna be parked.
That's great.
The commanding officer said, I get it. Go home, you guys. You're done. And that was the end of their tour of duty. They made it to the Lucky Bastards table.
Great story.
Thank you, Carol.
Seemed to be a big ask. Well, anything else, Todd, or should we wrap it up with something? I see Lucky with his hand up.
May I quickly ask Tom if he would to give us some idea of how large the 9th Air Force was? How many groups there were, how many B-25s and B-29s, P-47s, P-51s, and P-38s, if you know, because we were not aware of what the 9th Air Force was doing. We were too concentrated on our own business.
Sure. I'm gonna half guess. It's in my book. I knew it 30 years ago pretty well. Probably about a dozen fighter bomber groups. Maybe at the height, maybe a dozen and a half fighter bomber groups. Probably about a dozen troop carrier groups, the C-47s. Fewer B-25s. Fewer B-25 groups, maybe half a dozen of those. The largest subordinate command in the 9th Air Force is the Engineering Command, and there's 39,000 people in the 9th Air Force Engineering Command, these people that are building those airfields and doing those wires and things like that. And a fighter bomber group in the 9th Air Force, of these 12 to 18 fighter bomber groups at any given time, were composed of 3 squadrons of 25 planes each. So a fighter bomber group would have about 75 planes at full complement, about 1,500 people, and commanded by a lieutenant colonel or colonel whose average age, I do remember this, the average age of a fighter bomber group commander in the 9th Air Force in World War II is 28.
Yeah.
Which
very accurate.
Very interesting. Thank you so much.
When I was 30, that didn't seem so young, but at 60, that astonishes me that these people were that young. And of course, the people on our program are younger than that. What these people did at their age is, if you want to sit and reflect on it for a minute, is mind-boggling.
And humbling also to most of us, I think.
Yes. I was listening to Don Miller the other day on one of his podcasts, and he makes the point over and over again about not just the 8th Air Force, but applicable to the 9th Air Force, and I'm sure applicable to all the air forces in World War II, that never in the history of warfare had so many significant major decisions been made by so many young people in their early 20s, big decisions. Who's going to live? Who's going to die? What city we're going to bomb? What city we're not going to bomb, et cetera, et cetera. And at that time, with the communications, what they were, there was no calling somebody up on your cell phone to ask, hey, what do I do here? Those decisions were made on the spot by those young men. And that's what's incredible, among many things.
Yeah. These were enormous battles up in the sky, and that had never been done before. And you just couldn't do the organization and the orders that the chain of command that existed on the ground. And so you have these young people making these life or death decisions. Just incredible.
And I know I'm talking too much, but just a factoid: the number of casualties in the Army Air Forces is greater than the number of casualties in the United States Marine Corps in World War II.
Oh, easy. Yeah, yeah. I think just in the 8th Air Force, they're greater than the Marine Corps casualties. Not the
Yeah,
what the casualties were, but yeah.
The human toll of the air war was extraordinary.
Well, excuse me, Glenn, but that's not quite correct.
Oh, thank you.
The total number of fatalities of the Air Force in Europe was 43,000 some odd.
Right.
The 8th Air Force lost 26,123, for which they plant a 48-star flag at the 8th Air Force Museum in Savannah on Memorial Day each year. But that is the number of 8th Air Force losses. I don't know what the 9th Air Force losses were in comparison, but I do know that the total Air Force losses were 43,000, and that exceeded the number of fatalities of the Marine Corps throughout the war.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, the Marine Corps fatalities were
about 25,000.
28,000. I was going to say that's right. Well, all of them, though, fatalities, whichever way it was, all of them huge sacrifices for our country. Why don't we end the program, I guess, on that rather somber note, but let me thank Tom Hughes. Tom, you're a fountain of knowledge about the 9th Air Force. We appreciate you coming on and sharing even just a small part of that knowledge with us and helping us appreciate the role of the 9th. Catrell, as always, thank you. I'm glad we were able to get into some of your stories, and I'm absolutely certain that over a couple of drinks at a pub, I'm going to hear quite a few more in September. Lucky, you always be on. Thank you so much. And Joe, I'm not sure if Joe was able to figure out his internet issues. Do you know if he's on, Todd?
I don't believe he is.
Oh, okay. But thanks to all of you who have been great supporters of the VBC through these programs.
All right. Good night. Oh, no, Joe is here. Joe is with us. Thank you, Joe. Thanks for sticking with us. What a privilege it is to be in the company of these veterans and all of you who share our fascination with these stories. Thank you, Glenn, for walking us through it. All right. Take care. Good night. Good night, Joe. Good night, Lucky. Good night, Ed. Take care.
Thank you so much.